Welcome to the Ottawa International Writers Festival. Our 2020 virtual season is broadcasting from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe.
There's a point in the latest John Rebus novel where our long-lived, beloved, and bedraggled Rebus gets out of his sob, also bedraggled if not so beloved, and he sees statues of a lion and a unicorn holding shields in front of them. And Ian Rankin writes, both had been eroded by the elements down the years. To which Rebus says, in his very Rebus way, you and me both, guys. In fact, Rebus has seen better times physically. There are a few references here to his inhaler, his challenge with stairs, but it's also the effect of life and the weight carried that's at stake in this novel. Because at the heart of the novel is his relationship with his daughter, Samantha, who finds herself embroiled in a crime that hits very close to home, and Rebus is in the position of trying to prove her innocent, whether he completely believes she is or not, and has to, as a result, reflect back on what kind of father he is. I'm pretty sure I'm not what Samantha needs, he says at one point. I always enjoyed my job too much. My wife used to say it was like I was having an affair, staying out late, not home most weekends, and even when I did go home, the cases would still be in here. He tapped his forehead. It wasn't as if I could share any of that. No way I was going to introduce Rona and Sammy to that world. And he is told, maybe that was your mistake then. They didn't need a knight protecting them. Rona needed a husband, and Samantha a father. End of. The lengths that Rebus goes to in this novel to unravel the secrets of his daughter and her relationships, a mystery from 70 years ago, a cult nearby, all while helping, thank goodness, Siobhan Clarke, who's back, and Malcolm Fox in their separate investigation, is proof that, inhaler or not, Rebus has got what it takes. And that Ian Rankin can definitely still spin a tale that weaves together little murder, little history, music, the dog, Brillo, and one reference to an object I had never heard of called a he-wee. Ian Rankin joins us from Scotland. Hello there.
How you doing?
I'm fine. The he-wee.
You want to start with that? That's where you're going? Okay. That's a deep dive, yeah, it's as you get older, I mean, I know you're not there yet, but as you get older, you will find that your bladder, the male bladder, isn't as reliable as it once was. And so Rebus in his car would be certainly thinking of having a he-wee, which is a kind of plastic tube that can be elongated. It's like concertina style to fill up a remarkable amount of liquid, I have found myself. Just for those kind of times when you don't want to step out of the car to relieve yourself.
And I believe
that's a weird place to start.
I know. Well, this is. I want to assure people this is not the main plot of the story. It was this moment where I thought, where did this come from in terms of I think it's even Fox who
personal
has it, if I'm not mistaken.
Man. It's like everything in my books comes from personal experience. When I was doing the research for this book, because it's mostly set way up in the north coast of Scotland. A long way away from Edinburgh, where I live and where Rebus lives. I went on various long drives by myself, and sometimes the weather is inclement, so you don't want to step out of the car for a call of nature. And in those desperate times, you need something.
There's the he-wee. All right, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That's all we need from you today, Ian. That's our entire interview.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being. All right, let's start with Carrie, because I was thinking this is the perfect example of a character who is literally, I mean, I know all the characters have grown with you over time, but literally would have grown up over the course of the books you've written. Did that character end up being who you imagined when you first wrote her into a story?
Well, you saying Carrie? Do you mean the granddaughter, or do you mean Sammy?
Oh, I'm so sorry, not Carrie.
It's all right. If you mean Sammy, no,
I mean
it's
Samantha.
Okay. Don't worry about it. I was getting confused as well. Well, now here's the thing. I mean, Samantha, in the very first Rebus book, spoiler alert, written in '87, she plays a fairly major role, and it's a role that ends up quite harrowing for her in terms of personal experience. And then she came back into the series in book 3 because her mother had taken her down to London to kind of get away from the memories of what happened to her in book 1. And then Rebus arrives because there's a storyline happening in London. And she becomes involved again, and then she disappears for a while, and then she comes back and she's in a car accident and she's put in a wheelchair for a while. And then she disappears for a long time in the series. And yes, as you've suggested, I was thinking, what the hell has she been up to all this time? What's happened to her in her personal life? And since Rebus's retirement at the end of Exit Music, there's been the occasional phone call or an abrupt meeting. In one book, I do take him up north. I think it was standing on another man's grave, and he does drive up as far as her home, but she's not actually there, so they don't meet. But she was always playing at the back of my mind. And in this book, I wanted A, to bring her back into the series if I could, so we could catch up with her. B, she is now a mother herself, so let's see Rebus as a grandfather and how he's dealing with that. Um, and C, I really wanted to get Rebus out of his comfort zone. I wanted to get him away from Edinburgh, and I thought that the north coast of Scotland was a very interesting location to take him to.
It also puts him in a different personal stake. And I wondered what was different about that for you as a writer. Because Siobhan says at one point, I think he feels he let Samantha down, not just once, but over and over. And then the response is, and now's his chance to atone. Did you want to give him a chance to atone?
There's always, I mean, there was that tension right from the get-go. I thought if there's a case that arises that involves Rebus's daughter, he's definitely going to want to rush in there to help, try to help. But is he rushing in as a father or as a detective, an ex-detective, I should say? And is that conflict within him? Is he being a father or is he being a cop? And if he were to find evidence or clues or hints that his daughter was somehow involved in the disappearance of her partner, would he be a cop or would he be a parent? Would he try and cover it up? Would he try and put someone else in the frame? Or would he turn against her and want to put her in jail? And I just thought that's a really interesting dynamic, because once she starts to wonder herself whether her father is there, is he on her side? Whatever happens, is he on her side, or is he a cop to the very bones of his being? That makes for a very interesting personal dynamic. And as Rebus has grown older and can see mortality marching towards him, he's wondering about his legacy. He's wondering about his family relationships. He's wondering if he can reconnect the ties that once, held him to his daughter. But this case threatens to sever those ties entirely. And so that makes him that's what keeps me interested in the character, I guess, is the fact that in each book I'm presented with a new challenge as to where he is in his personal as well as his professional life. And where is he going to take me this time?
It's interesting because there's that fantastic scene where she breaks in front of him and she says, haven't you done enough? Just that one line. And you call it a yell of accusation, a howling of the only thing in the world at that moment close enough to deserve it. And when Rebus tried reaching out again, she slapped at his hands. I've managed fine without you all these years. What's fantastic about it is that you start to get a sense of whether she can hide her emotions as well as he can, or whether they've both held back expressing what they've thought for so long. But I wonder if it's also do you think they have fully explored what difference Rebus's lifestyle made to her and her decisions in life? Like, would they be the father or daughter who would have ever really gotten into it?
Well, I mean, in several of the books, Rebus owns up. He fesses up to the fact that he always put his job first.
Yeah.
And he tended to take the job home with him. And so at the dinner table, he was a blank because his mind was elsewhere. His mind was focused on terrible things that had happened that he could not talk about to his wife and daughter, and cases he was working on that were completely obsessing him to the point that he wasn't giving as much attention or love or affection to his wife and daughter as he should have. And that eventually leads to the breakup of his marriage, and eventually leads to a disaffection, so that him and his daughter, the further apart they are, the better they can communicate with each other, because put in the same room, they're almost too similar in some ways, or they're both damaged. They've both been damaged by Rebus's job. She's been caught up in some of the things he's worked on, and that has been detrimental to her personal growth and her well-being. And I do wonder, in some way, whether that reflects my own feelings as a novelist, that bringing up two kids a lot of it was left to my wife. Even when I was there physically, I wasn't always there emotionally or mentally because my head was in the book that I
Right.
was writing at
Right.
the time. So, we go back over, my wife will talk about holidays, vacations that we had with the kids, and I literally won't remember them. I was there, and I seemed to be doing stuff, but I was going through the motions while my brain was busy thinking how to get Rebus out of this predicament, or what am I going to do with him next, or what is the theme of this book that I'm exploring. So I feel that I missed a lot of my kids' upbringing because of that, because I was giving over too much of myself to these characters, and I think I've given that to Rebus. I think I've just presented him with the same issues and problems that I maybe feel that I've had myself. It's like a previous book, a fairly recent book. Rather Be the Devil, a friend of mine said to me after he read it, Ian, this is a book about fathers and sons predominantly. He said it's really a book about your kids leaving home,
Yeah.
about your sons flying the nest, and you're wondering if you could have made a better job of being a father. So he was reading quite deeply into that book, stuff that on the surface I hadn't noticed. It was only when it was presented to me in that way that I thought, yeah, you're right, because it's lots of surrogate fathers and children in that book, and I'm wondering what kind of, would I have done things differently
Mm-hmm.
in the way that I brought up my own kids. So yeah, all the books, whether they're, they seem to be on the surface thrillers, whodunits, crime novels. Rebus is nothing like me, or seems to be nothing like me on the surface, but they've always been my way of, they've been my therapy.
Yeah.
Rebus has been my therapist, God bless him. And he saved me a fortune along the way.
Do you find, better is not the right term, but do you find it easier now to have the balance that you didn't have maybe when the kids were growing up?
Well, insofar as my kids have left home, I suppose yes, but you never stop worrying about them. You never stop trying to think of ways you can make their lives better, but you don't want to be a helicopter parent if you can
Hmm.
avoid it. But yeah, I mean, our both our sons live in Edinburgh. One lives a 10-minute walk away, and one lives a 30-minute walk away. We see them both fairly regularly, although one's got special needs, so we don't see him as much as we could. He's in a facility for people with special needs, disabled people. Um, but yeah, I guess I don't know, man. If it's easier, does it get easier or not? I don't know, because Rebus is at that stage in his life where he's looking back. He's looking back because there's not a lot waiting for him when he looks forwards.
Right.
And I seem to be doing a lot more of that. I hit 60 this year, and maybe hitting 60 did something to the inside of my head. Also, I've written, the final book of my contract, so I'm out of contract. And if COVID hadn't come along, my wife Miranda's plan was that she and I would spend an awful lot of time from now on traveling the world, having lovely holidays and lovely adventures while we still can physically do it. Before the he we years, really. And that hasn't
That's the
happened.
name of the
That
next
really
book,
hasn't
right?
happened.
That is going to be the name of the next Rebus book. The
Yeah, I
Huey
know. I hope
years.
that it's not the name. It's not the title of my autobiography. I hope. I hope it's not. But no, that didn't happen. That hasn't been allowed to happen because of COVID. So I'm kind of sitting here in a kind of limbo
Yeah.
where I'm doing a lot of looking back over the sequence of books I've written, saying, is there anything I've not done yet? What do I want to do next, if anything? Financially, I don't need to do anything. I'm in a very fortunate position.
Hmm.
But emotionally, psychologically, therapeutically, maybe I do need to keep writing. And if I do need to keep writing, is Rebus still the best means of me dealing with all these ghosts and all these demons?
It's interesting because there is a point where he it says he remembered Carrie, and in this case it actually is Carrie, the granddaughter, watching him as he slept on the sofa. Where's my daddy? I heard Mummy crying. Many more tears he knew would be shed before the day was finished. And it struck me just when you're talking about looking back on the things that we have seen Rebus done, we haven't seen Rebus done, is that I was trying to think of scenes where Rebus cried in the series. And have we seen Rebus cry, or what was the most emotional case for him, do you think?
Yeah, we did, and I'm going to forget which book it was. I think it might have been The Hanging Garden. Or was it Black and Blue? There's a scene on the meadows, which is a kind of grassy parkland near where Rebus lives, and it's late at night, and him and a fellow cop who's also probably his best friend from the early books. Um, end up fighting each other for no really apparently good reason. Just
Right.
they're just full of aggression and anger and questions and doubt and everything else, and they end up going at it. And they both end up on their hands and knees on the grass, kind of sniveling and sniffling and choking and sobbing. Uh, so there's that. Now, he's been in a couple of fights since then. He was in a fight with Cafferty outside his apartment block.
Mm.
I don't think it ended up in tears, but it wasn't far off it. But no, late at night, I mean, he's very much in the vein of the working class, blue collar Scotsman of a certain age and a certain type. You're brought up not to show emotion. You're brought up not to show weakness. And certainly as a cop, he would never want to show weakness to anybody else. So he bottles everything up. That's been part of his problem throughout, is that he tends to bottle things up. And when they come out roaring, but they don't come out very often, if ever. But there's that sense of him being bridled a lot of the time and not wanting to express emotion. It's funny, I mean, maybe we're going to talk about this later, but during the lockdown, I was invited by the National Theatre of Scotland to do a very short play, just a monologue of how Rebus would deal with COVID and the lockdown. And a lot of fans had been asking me via social media, via Twitter and elsewhere, what would Rebus be doing?
Mm-hmm.
He's got COPD, emphysema. He will be sheltering. He will be isolating. He will be in quarantine, etc., etc. How's he going to cope with that? And writing this little 10-minute play allowed me to deal with that. And it was actually filmed. You can see it online. If you go to YouTube and look up National Theatre of Scotland, you'll find it, done by Brian Cox,
Oh, wow.
the great Scottish actor who's currently having a wow of a time in Succession on TV.
Yeah.
And he plays Rebus, full of fragility, full of questions, dependent on others, totally dependent on Siobhan Clarke, his one-time colleague, to bring him his shopping, to bring him the newspaper, to bring him some booze. She refuses to bring him cigarettes. She takes the dog Brillo for a walk because he's not even allowed to go out with a dog. And suddenly he wants to tell her he's grateful. He wants to tell her what all of this means to him and what she has always meant to him. And he's struggling to do that as a working class Scot of a certain age. He's struggling to be able to say the words out loud because they would embarrass him.
Yeah.
They would embarrass him. So yeah, that I was able to deal with that, which was a real blessing in disguise.
I was thinking, I mean, the pandemic, for all of these characters, they would respond probably very differently to it. And I was thinking even just the whole sense of the Oxford, right? Like there's no way the people could be hanging out. So many of your scenes, even in this book, they involve people being in small quarters, strangers meeting in those zones. Like that's the basic Rebus scene, right? Whether it's the bar or the cop station or the...
Well, I mean, the whole series of books has just been an excuse for me to spend time in bars, basically. Pretend that's where I do my research. But it is where I do my research. It's where I get a taste of human nature, where I get to be around fellow human beings and eavesdrop on their stories and their lives. And it's been hard. I mean, the Oxford Bar, which is where Rebus drinks and where I drink, is a very small, intimate space where social distancing isn't possible from the moment you walk in through the door. You're literally 1 meter from the person behind the bar.
Yeah.
You could have probably 2 people in the front bar keeping a 2 meter distance. It's crazy. So it's economically unable to reopen. And quite a few of my favourite bars in Edinburgh are exactly the same. So I'm so pleased in a way that I chose to set this book from the get-go. I chose to set it in the summer of 2019, not the summer of 2020, because that would have been a very different book. Let me tell you very quickly, for my 60th birthday, which was right in the middle of lockdown, 28th of April, I thought there's no way that a pandemic virus is going to stop me from going to the Oxford Bar on my 60th birthday. And at this time, we were allowed 1 hour's outdoor exercise per day. So I put a pint glass and a can of beer in my pocket, and I walked to the Oxford Bar briskly. It's a brisk 20-minute walk. I stood outside, opened the can, poured it into the glass, drank it, toasted myself, took a picture, and then briskly walked home again. That was my day's exercise. And I mean, what a way to spend your 60th birthday! I'll never forget that. But yeah, and since the lockdown eased, I've been back into a few bars, but it just ain't the same. What I like to do is walk in at my leisure, not having booked a time slot to go,
Yeah.
and just stand at the bar and just talk to strangers or listen to strangers. And of course, you're not allowed to stand at the bar. It's all table service only. You've got to give all your details when you go in. It's the experience is gone, man. It's just, and whether we'll ever get it back, I don't know. I really don't. And it's crippling for the licensed drinks trade
Oh yeah.
in the UK. Absolutely crippling.
Well, and I wondered, could you write a Rebus novel set in the pandemic? Like, I mean, the monologue is a brilliant way of getting at it. I guess of at least seeing that snapshot of what it might be like. But I would kind of be fascinated.
I desperately hope I don't do
that. Really?
Because there's going to be a slew of thrillers coming out based in and around the lockdown and the virus. Some of them will be good, many of them will be bad.
Yeah.
But I mean, is anybody going to want to read about this in the short term? Really, we're looking for escapism. We're not really looking to confront what's just happened to us. And B, I don't, what would I do? I mean, a heist maybe, because all these hotels and stores that were closed and boarded up, anything could have been happening. The streets were quiet, so anything could have been happening behind those locked and boarded up doors and windows. So there's a possibility of that, but dear God, I can't. I don't think I'll do it. I don't think I'll do it. Before we came on air, I did say to you that I mean, this new book was written during lockdown. I started it. Well, let me think. I started it September, October, 2019. Then I took Christmas off. The bulk of it was written January. Well, no, yeah, the bulk of it was written January, February. And then I did the research. February, I did the research. So in February, I drove up to the north coast of Scotland to check out where the bulk of the book was going to be set. And then got back to Edinburgh just in time for the lockdown to come. And so the rest of the book, the second draft, and all the edits were done during lockdown. And the one thing I was unable to check, I mean, I don't trust the internet for research. I like to go to a place and actually do the research. And the one thing I wasn't able to do was go to Edinburgh Airport to look at the rental car desks and where the rental cars are kept. So that, I'm afraid, is from my imagination. And I'm sure someone out at Edinburgh Airport will be saying, no, I think you'll find, Mr. Rankin, that the car rental desks are over here and the car parking spaces for the rental cars are over here. Because you weren't allowed to go even 8 kilometers, 5 miles, which, the airport is further than that from my home. So I couldn't do that bit of the research. Everything else I did, I was so lucky. I got into libraries. The library books I needed to borrow, I was in and got them in January, February. And the trip up north I was able to take lots of photographs. So I was fortunate in a way. And then, of course, I got months and months of peace and quiet to write the book.
Nobody's interrupting you.
And to write the play and everything else.
Wow.
But sadly, it means no trips to Canada, no trips to the States, no tour. So, doing all these online events is fantastic and it's great. And in some ways, it's very democratic. I've taken part in a few as a reader, as someone, actually attending some of these book festivals that have happened here in the UK online since COVID hit. And it's great. You get people from all over the world tuning in, and they can be lying in bed in their jammies, watching an event with writers. They can leave little messages down the side of the screen sometimes. It isn't costing them a fortune in travel and hotel accommodation or whatever to go to these festivals. But it's a tough way to sell books.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing the festivals and the writers aren't getting from this is much in the way of income. Yeah. So I don't know whether the Ottawa Festival is asking for donations or whether people are actually paying to watch. But that, if we're going to do these kinds of things in future, there's got to be a slight change in the model so that people, it can be worth everybody's while.
It's interesting to think. I was just thinking about when you said the potential heist during a pandemic, and I was trying to think how Cafferty would be during a pandemic, whether he would find an angle to make it work for him or not.
Well, and at the end of a previous book, I've got Cafferty talking on the telephone to an Irish gangster, and the two of them are the only two people in my books looking forward to Brexit.
Yeah, that's right.
because they are disaster capitalists.
Yeah.
That is how they see themselves. They see themselves as disaster capitalists. And if barriers and borders between trade to free trade come down, they will find a way of making money from it.
Right.
You'll start to get a black market again. You'll start to get smuggling again. So yeah, something like COVID, Cafferty would have been looking for a way to make money out of it, possibly running toilet rolls, because that was the one thing you couldn't get at the start of the lockdown. It was like gold. People were clearing the shelves of fresh produce and toilet rolls. So Cafferty would have his apartment filled with booty that he'd then be sort of on the streets. It wouldn't be drug dealers on the streets. It would be people. Have you got any 3-ply? Have you got any aloe vera? Have you got the good stuff, the aloe vera, the soft stuff? I don't want the hard stuff.
there is this great scene. Well, I shouldn't say great, but there's in this book where Cafferty says, like an old band coaxed on the road again, smack was making a comeback. Coke had stopped being available only to the wealthy. Crack and methadone and benzos were everywhere. Money was being made. And you just feel like how the relief that Cafferty feels at this point. Who he faces off most with in this book, though, is not Rebus, but Fox. And I was curious, what, as a writer, was that a pairing, a facing off that you kind of relished, that idea of those two characters being, and Fox almost ending up under Cafferty's spell?
Yeah, it's either more chance or serendipity, or else it's more organic than that, I think. I knew that Rebus was not going to be in Edinburgh. I wanted a story that would be set in Edinburgh. I thought that Siobhan Clarke and Malcolm Fox would be good characters for it. I mean, somebody's got to look after the dog when Rebus is up north.
Poor Brillo. Thank goodness.
Someone's got to look after Brillo. So I need cops to look after Brillo, the dog. Never work with children and animals. It's true of novelists as well as actors. And I had this plot, I had this storyline of a rich, a wealthy student who's killed, and he's Arabian. He's from Saudi Arabia. And he's very well connected and very rich, and his family are very rich. And he's killed and found in the wrong part of town, a part of town he shouldn't have been in. So there was that plot, and I thought, okay, I can give that to Siobhan and Malcolm Fox. And then Cafferty, as is his way, just inveigles himself into the book. When I started to think of the plot, there was no role for Cafferty really, but he just insists on being there. And I found something that I could do with him, and I found interesting things to do with him that sort of change him as the book progresses. And as you say, with Rebus no longer a detective, Cafferty needs someone to play with. He needs a protagonist or an antagonist, depending on which one he is. And he's looked at Siobhan Clarke, but he knows that she's solid. There's no way that he can persuade her to cross the line. Malcolm Fox is a more intriguing prospect for him, I think, and that's what attracts him to Fox, is that he thinks in Fox he's got someone who might be persuadable to play games, or to become caught up in his web, as it were. So there's that, and that makes for an intriguing prospect, because then Siobhan Clarke and Malcolm Fox are almost in a protagonist-antagonist role as well. If one of them seems to be falling under Cafferty's spell, what's the other one going to do about it?
Yeah.
All of that was great, and it was nice that now and again I could jump from the north of Scotland, this little village, very insular, clannish, into the bigger city, and there's a little bit more breathing room. When you get to a big city, there's much more stuff that can be going on. But the north of Scotland was great. I mean, taking Rebus up there was fantastic. And again, it was serendipity. I thought, I want to take Rebus up north. I want to involve something that happens to his daughter. What happens? Her partner goes missing. What do we know about her partner? Could it have? And I thought, he works at he's dismantling a nuclear power station. Could it have something to do with that? So the first idea I got was that something nefarious had happened at this decommissioning of this power station. And then on one of my trips up north, I came across this. In fact, no, I'd read the story, and I'd seen an interview in a newspaper with a guy who'd written a book about internment camps in Scotland during World War II. And one of these camps was way up in the north of Scotland. And so I got intrigued by it and I did some research into it. And what I found seemed to me parallels with the way the world is going at the moment. At the start of World War II, in the UK, we started to lock up our friends, our neighbours, anybody who didn't come from the same culture as us, anybody who looked a bit different or had a different surname from us. And they were locked up en masse. And it was kind of, it was because of fear, because of mistrust. It was neighbour put against neighbour. And the media stirred up to a certain extent. Politicians stirred up for their own use. And it seemed to me that was a mirror image with the way the world seems to be going, or could go in the very near future if things keep going as they are, which is this sense that we're becoming polarized, not only atomized, but also polarized. And there's no room for debate, Alan. There's no room for debate, especially online. It's us and them. It's you're for me or against me. You're my friend or my enemy. There's no middle ground. There's no nuance. And all of that I wanted to talk about. And putting it giving it some context, some historical context, made it easier for me to talk about it.
There's a line, and I was just trying to find where I'd written it down. There it is. This world is on a path to chaos. Have you not noticed? I've heard it compared to the 1930s. Everyone bitter and pointing the finger at the person they think is to blame for their misfortune. It was an ugly time then, an ugly time now. Please don't ask me to dig it up again. This is one of the older people involved with the camp at the time. It struck me also that sort of older cast of characters that Rebus is trying to unravel the mystery with, who are dealing with that camp. There's as I mentioned, a 70-year-old mystery there that involves a lot of secrets having been kept at the time and people not telling the whole story. And in a way, all the characters in the book, what is kind of holding them back are the secrets that they've kept. I mean, Malcolm Fox, by not telling Siobhan what's going on completely, is weaving he's getting wrapped in a web. The person who he's protecting, his boss, her husband, has been keeping secrets, which is wrapping him up in the web. Rebus, of course, and his daughter has kept secrets from her as well, entangled as well. And I wondered how intentional that was this time around, that idea that the secrets kind of that we keep end up weighing us down.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we all present a certain face to the world, but it might not be the whole story. And especially these days, a lot of what we encounter is surface only. It's why I said to you, I don't always trust the internet for research, is because, you might be reading something and, there used to be a thing called truth that we can believe. There were facts. We believed in facts. And now we're being presented with stuff all the time, a slew of stuff, and we don't know what to believe. Yeah. And that's going to get worse before it gets better, because the way you can now use technology, new technologies, to make something look real when it is in fact fake is a very worrying trajectory, I think, for all of us who believe in some essential truths. Some truths are essential. And that's what the crime novel has always done. What the crime novel does is takes the surface of the world, the surface of society, the surface of whichever culture it's talking about, and just scratch it a little to see what's just beneath, what's hiding beneath the veneer. When I started writing books about Edinburgh, it was very much because I saw Edinburgh as having this veneer of civilization, presenting itself to the world as a cultured place, as a place of great discoveries and people of science and great artists and writers and everything else, a place full of museums and statues and monuments. But when you scratch the surface, it had the same problems as anywhere else, the same social issues as anywhere else, the same political problems as anywhere else. And still the 7 deadly sins from the Bible are there as soon as you start to scratch the surface. And so what I really want to do is show people there's more to Edinburgh than that. And of course, in Edinburgh, we've got the perfect paradigm of that in literature, which is Jekyll and Hyde. The notion that somebody on the surface can be civilized and an upstanding member of society, but underneath is a mass of contradictory and febrile feelings, which, if they come to the fore, turn them into something much uglier than the surface character. And that's what all crime fiction comes back to, I think. It's why, again and again, I keep rewriting Jekyll and Hyde. It's not the only book in Scottish literature that deals with that. There's another very famous, if you're into Scottish literature, book called Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner by a guy called James Hogg, which was an influence on Jekyll and Hyde, and is about a young religious zealot who's persuaded by a charismatic stranger to start killing people who don't agree with his religion. And that charismatic stranger may be a figment of his twisted imagination, or it may be the devil, or it may be a kind of psychopath. We're never told exactly. We've got to make up our own minds as readers what's going on here. Those books were the lodestones for me.
Yeah.
Those books were the lodestones. And via those books, and I guess Miss Jean Brodie from Muriel Sparks, a prime Miss Jean Brodie, who is both hero and villain of that book. She's very much a Jekyll and Hyde character.
That is fascinating.
That's where all my crime novels begin from. They don't begin with me reading Agatha Christie or me reading Sherlock Holmes, because I never read Agatha Christie or Sherlock Holmes. But by God, when I was a student, I read a lot of Jekyll and Hyde and I read a lot of Muriel Spark.
It's also interesting. I mean, when you talk about the policing itself changing over time, there's several scenes where you just get these snapshots of how things are shifting, where somebody says, now the cops like Rebus are history. You've lost a valuable resource. Snitches, grasses, eyes and ears on the street. Human intelligence is the term these days. You're offering to put the word out. Mind if I ask why? And a while later, you have Siobhan negotiating her way towards the murder wall, and it's dispiriting how little of note had been added to it recently. There seemed to not be enough oxygen in the room. They were in the danger of beginning the process of going through the motions. And then the third example, there's a point where she's talking about how the next generation of cops, there was still the occasional big night out, a release of pressure, but mostly they tended to treat the job as just that, a job. They were damned if police work was going to consume their every waking hour. Each of those provides a little snapshot into how policing itself, the dedication, perhaps, or the actual emotional connection the officers are having to their work might be shifting over time. And I wondered how much you wanted to explore that. It's a very interesting time right now with defund the police, etc., changing what a lot of people are seeing as the police novel. Were you thinking about how policing itself was shifting when you're writing this?
There is a very big discussion to be had on this. I don't know if this is the time or place for it, but there is a discussion that's kind of started now because of what's happened, especially in the USA. The way that cops are now perceived in the USA, and some of the stuff we've all seen them doing and getting away with, it would appear. That some people are saying, look, people who write police procedurals really are doing PR for the police, and it's not merited. You're making the readers believe that their safety depends on these people, and sometimes these people are the problem. It's a complex issue, it really is. Someone like Rebus is very much a dinosaur. He's the last of that old-fashioned kind of cop who did work the streets, who did get to know everybody, who did have snitches, grasses who would come and talk to him and give him information. The cops these days tend to be all have been to university and college. They're kind of smarter in that way, but they've not always got street smarts, and they depend a lot on technology. They depend on new technologies to help them solve the crimes, which kind of distances them from the people who are affected by the crimes. So they're not getting a sense of the effect these crimes have on the wider community. So there's something being lost along the way, I think. At the same time, in the UK, we don't have the problems that they have in the States. We all know there have been cases of bad cops. But just a couple of days ago, in just outside London, there was a cop who was shot and killed in a police station by a suspect. That's the first time that's happened in a long, long time, if ever, I believe, in a custody suite. So cops are dying as well as innocent people. And the cops themselves who are killed are often innocent, well, very often innocent ones as well. It's a big question. I mean, I do try and explore in the books that difference between the different kinds of policing, the policing that Rebus used to do that used to be widespread. And by the way, it wasn't all good. I mean, he took a lot of, he cut a lot of corners. Him and his fellow cops, often in my books, are being investigated for things they did in the past. retired cops who just bent the rules way too much in the past. I mean, the previous Rebus novel dealt with that big time. And you can't get away with that now. You can't get away with it for all kinds of reasons. The main one being the public are armed with mobile phones that can take video. So, beating up a suspect on the street you're not going to get away with that the way you once could. Slapping people around in the interview room, you're not going to get away with that the way you once could because everything's being videoed for everybody's benefit. So cops like Siobhan Clarke, Malcolm Fox come from a very different place, a very different philosophy of policing from someone like Rebus. But many of them in real life do, treat it as a job. And whenever I get together with old retired cops, beat cops, uniformed cops, the stories, the war stories, the battle stories you hear are amazing. They're phenomenal. I don't get those stories from the younger cops who are now serving. They don't want to share them, and B, the stories just aren't there.
Mm-hmm.
They're much more like middle management people. They go home at the end of the day's shift and they put the job to one side. And that means they survive better mentally in terms of their own mental well-being. They survive better. I mean, police used to be a terrible job to be in, lots of divorces. Almost every cop I knew was divorced when I started writing this series. And now that isn't the case because you get better training, you get helped. If you've been at a situation, let's say a horrible suicide or something, there will be some help for you afterwards that you wouldn't have got previously. And people are just treating the job as a job, and they're able to shrug it off and go home at night and enjoy their personal life. Rebus never could, and I think that's why we like him. We like Rebus because his personal relationships meant nothing to him. Nothing meant as much to him as finding whoever did this terrible thing,
right,
and making sure they went to trial.
And then that's when you see what the effect it has on somebody like Samantha later on, in a moment like this. Now, speaking of the personal lives of the other characters, though, it does. We do, of course, have to talk about Siobhan and her love life. It's Sutherland. She's supposed to be, in theory, together with him. We barely see them communicate in this. Is this actually a good relationship for Siobhan with Sutherland? Because
I don't know. I've for a long time she didn't have any relationships at all. Then she had bad relationships. I thought this might be a good one. I thought that they might chime. I'm not sure it's working. I don't think it's working for her. It's probably not working for him either. So it's probably not going to last. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't want her to become Rebus with a bra. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like he's a loner. She's been a loner most of the books. He goes home at night and listens to music. She goes home at night, eats chocolate, watches TV, and listens to music. He's got no encumbrances. She's got no encumbrances. If I'm not careful, that's what she's going to turn into, is just a kind of female version of him, and I don't want that to happen. I want her to have her own life and her own to make her own decisions. So I don't know. Maybe people said, oh, maybe she's going to get together with Malcolm Fox. No, that ain't going to happen. That's never going to happen.
But they do. What's weird is there is this strange chemistry, and I don't know if it's a surprise to you as a writer, like whether, I don't know how much of it is crafted and sat there and thought, okay, this is how their relationship's going to be, or if it is a matter of sort of putting two characters in a room and seeing how they bounce off each other, like speed dating for fictional characters. But if there is this strange thing that when I'm reading it, at least, it almost works better with Fox because they're kind of driving each other crazy than it does with Sutherland, where there just didn't seem to be anything.
Yeah, no, maybe you're right. Maybe I should look into that again. Maybe I should look into that. I don't know. I mean, we've spoken about this before, Alan. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know from one book to the next what I'm doing. When I start a new book, I don't know what it's going to be about. When I start it, I don't know what the ending's going to be. I don't know who done it. I just, the book tells me is this an interesting place to go? Places where I think the book wants to go. The book says, no, let's go here instead. I mean, the Edinburgh story grew and grew and grew. It was only going to be a very minor part of the book to start with, and it just grew legs, as it were. When I took Rebus up north, he suddenly walks into a bar, and there's a barmaid who seems to be interested in him. The owner of the pub seems to be interested in him. I go, oh, hello, where did you come from? Where did you come from?
And what happened to Deborah Quant?
Yeah, really. I know all these characters that I get. Well, again, yeah, she's mentioned very early on in the book. She phones Rebus up and he says, "Are we going to see each other?" And then he heads north, and that's the end of that.
And there he is with
But
this barmaid.
they've always just been friends with benefits. Friends with benefits is what they've been. And Deborah Quant is a pathologist, so she is going to play a role in the books as long as I've got a dead body somewhere. And so she does have a role to play in this book because there is a dead body.
I was
But
thinking
yeah,
because she gets mentioned when it's like these flies feeding at the gaping wound. And I was like, wow, this is what you end up with after like you're the romantic figure in for Rebus 1 minute. Now you're just the supplier of information about flies that feed on gaping wounds. And this is what happens.
Yeah, but that's great. That's fascinating. I find all that stuff. I love talking to pathologists. One of my favorite things is talking to pathologists now. Oh my God! I was just thinking. I went to a charity event a while ago before the lockdown, and there was one of the pathologists. It was mostly cops and pathologists and people like that. And he gave an after dinner speech, and it was just. It was hardcore. It was hardcore. There were seasoned veterans in the room who were turning a little bit kind of pale. And I was scribbling notes on my napkin. Keep going, man. Keep going. This is
definitely going to use this thing about flesh rot. Yeah. Let me just between the chocolate mousse, I'm just going to mark down here what happens at a certain
when he started showing the slides. It's when he started showing the slides. Yeah. And he said, and about the third or fourth one, he said, "Oh yeah, sorry, I should have said these are dead bodies." Because it was tattoos. He was showing us tattoos at first, and just people's tattoos, and he said, "Yeah, you'll notice they are all on a slab." Oh my God!
Well,
anyway, dig deep for charity, folks. Just dig deep for charity. And here's the next speaker.
Here's another dead body for you. So there is of course the creation of this new woman in the bar. I will say though that the two women in this book that I found particularly interesting was almost you created new nemeses for Siobhan in a way. You've got Lady Isabella, and then you've got Patricia Coleridge, the lawyer. And I have to say, there's something about both of them that I'm kind of hoping the dynamic that Siobhan, the ability that you've created there for Siobhan to push back, and each of them are so unique. Patricia Coleridge, this a pretty fierce lawyer who's even the way you describe her with this thin mane of straw blonde hair, the piercing gray eyes, and unzipping the leather notebook and the screwing of the top of the pen. I was just like, I know who this is going to be a good character. I just knew the minute she came on the scene. And Lady Isabella has this fantastic line with Fox where he says, you're trying to put together a puzzle, and she says, "Are you sure kerplunk isn't a better analogy? Because when I look at you, I see two people with nothing but the straws they're yanking on." And I thought, okay, yes, you can stay. You can stay. Were they those using those two women as examples? Were they ones who surprised you a little bit in their roles in the book in terms of how much screen time they allowed to take over?
Sure. I mean, it's always gold dust when that happens. You create a character, and you create them because there's certain information that a detective or a character needs, and so a character needs to give them that information, and they just leap onto the page. They just blossom, and you think, "Oh, hello. Hopefully, I can do more with you." Because you're a really interesting person. You've immediately become a three-dimensional character. You're no longer just a cipher.
Yeah.
Just a means of communicating a clue or a red herring. You're actually a real living, breathing person. Hi, hello, good to meet you.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work that way. And sometimes characters you think are going to be major characters. The guy who runs the commune up north, I thought was going to be a major character, but I just couldn't get interested in him.
That's so interesting.
You know? I mean, I was quite interested in the motor mechanic who's splitting logs and stuff. And I'd been to see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Quentin Tarantino movie, and there's a scene where they go out to one of the characters goes out to the Manson family ranch, and I thought, yeah, that's kind of what I'm creating here is almost like the Manson family. But the main guy just didn't do it for me in the way that people like Lady Isabella did. And she's just... Yeah, she's full of life, and maybe will she come back in a future book? I don't know. Is she alive or dead at the end of this one? I can't remember. But yeah, hey, Alan, I always need a lawyer. I mean, the books, I always need a pathologist, and I always need a lawyer. So hopefully we'll be seeing her again, because she was a lot of fun to write about. The only thing was, you just mentioned it there. You said she opened her notebook. Now, to me, is it a computer notebook or is it a paper notebook?
What did
Because
you
in the
see?
reader's mind, you've got to tell the reader what kind of notebook is now. You've got to say, well,
Yeah.
it's like a laptop. I call laptops laptops. That's the age I grew up in, and now we're being told to call them notebooks and things. You can't call them laptops because somebody once sued a company because it burnt their lap or something.
Yeah.
So these things are not meant to be sitting on your lap because the battery can run hot and burn you. So notebook has changed its meaning completely. The old-fashioned police notebook hardly exists now. When we were, there was an incident in our street many years ago, and the uniform who turned up, had this little computer thing. It was almost like a mobile phone, and he was tapping all the information in, and then you just signed the screen. That was you having given your evidence to him. And I just thought, it's not quite as fun as having a paper notebook and an old
But
biro pen.
what's interesting
I
about
still
that,
use pen. I
though?
mean, you can look.
Yeah.
I'm working on a project just now, and it's lined notebooks and sheets of paper everywhere, and old-fashioned biro pens. I buy them by the bucket load.
Yeah.
You know, I'm um, very much an analog man in a digital world.
But what's interesting is with Coleridge, like with using her as an example of unscrewing that expensive looking pen, a completely different character would have been crafted had she pulled out a phone and started typing. You could have the same personality, but you gave a clue immediately as to what she was about because she had a pen. And what I find interesting often with the way you write is the details that indicate a lot more about either character. And there's several examples in this book where people are examining rooms after people are deceased. I think in both cases that I'm thinking of here, where you have somebody walking through the room and seeing the bedside drawers in the main bedroom, identical small tables, her side a half-empty blister pack of ibuprofen, nail scissors, phone charger, clock radio, his a football biography, iPad, headphones. Or in another scene altogether, they walk into a room and he sees condoms, a selection of over-the-counter pills, no reading matter by the bed. You describe the type of television that they have. Like, are you the person who goes into rooms and does the Terminator scanning through? What do they have on the walls? What do they have?
I'm pretty sure when I was a kid, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I'm pretty sure when I was a kid and I visited relatives' homes, I would excuse myself to go to the bathroom and go and have a quick look in their bedroom and go into the drawers and see what they kept. I was just I was a very inquisitive voyeur. And if any novelist tells you that they are not a professional voyeur, they are lying to you. We are. I am endlessly fascinated by what people own, what they have, and it's why I'm desperately sad about the digital world.
Yeah.
It's anathema to me to walk into someone's home and there are no bookshelves with books. There's no record collection or CD collection. There's no wall of DVDs or, bless them, videos. There's none of that. They just present you an iPad and some kind of remote thing that allows them to change the music from these tiny invisible speakers in the walls.
Yeah.
I go, no, that's not what I want. I want your personality, and your personality to me is everything. I mean, you're sitting there with walls of books behind you. I've got walls of books behind me. If anybody's trying to look too closely, they're all foreign editions of the Rebus novels. One copy of every Rebus novel in every language it's ever been in. The proper books are over here. You can't see them. Yeah, well, we had to downsize. We downsized last year, and this is on a tangent as well. But when we downsized, I had to get rid of a hell of a lot of stuff, including lots of books. Lots of books had to go, which was great for the charity shops of Edinburgh, but very bad for my karma for quite a while. So yeah, I love all that, and one of my favourite bits actually, you've not mentioned it, but when Siobhan Clarke and Malcolm Fox go to the deceased Saudi rich kid student's big posh house, he's got a James Bond fetish, and everywhere they go, there are these little toy cars, little with ejector seats
Martin,
and stuff. And signed photographs of Sean Connery and posters from the films and everything. I just loved writing those scenes. I just thought this tells you everything you want to know about a playboy Saudi prince. Although in the end I didn't make him a prince. I was going to make him a member of the royal family in India, and I didn't. but everything you need to know about him and about what his life would have been like had he not been killed
Yeah.
is almost summed up in the interior of this house.
It's interesting because, and I want to clarify for anybody who can see the books behind me, I'm in the Writers Fest headquarters right now. This is not my home, so these books are not mine that anyone can see. It's I can take no credit for being as learned as all the books behind me.
I hope nobody set those up specially for you, because the only one I can read is over your left shoulder, which is the Diabolic. So the Diabolic Alan Neal, ladies and gentlemen.
They've planned it well. Cafferty in Canada. But Rebus goes through this downsizing exercise as well, where he has to get rid of
because I've done it. Because I've done it. I mean, ridiculous. I'd just been through this whole thing, and so I did it to him. But partly that was because he had to. Partly the COPD means that he's going to find stairs very difficult. And he lives up 2 flights, 2 stories in a tenement block in Edinburgh. And realistically, that wasn't going to become possible for him anymore. So right from the get-go, I knew that he was going to move. And fortunately, I got the idea that he wouldn't move very far. Someone would sell up in the same block, but at ground level. And so he could move into their apartment. And so he's literally in the same block, but just at ground level now. But that was mirroring what I was going through just before I started writing the book. We moved May 2019. We moved, and I started writing this book in September. So yeah, that was part of it. And bizarrely, a few weeks ago, in real life, Rebus's apartment went on the market. It's extraordinary. He lives at, I think it's 19 Arden Street, 2 stories up. And someone tweeted me and said, "Hey, look, have you looked in the local estate agents? Rebus's apartment is up for sale." And they're actually saying, "This is Rebus's apartment that's up for sale." I thought, that is so bizarre. And somebody did suggest to me that I should buy it so that I could let it out as a Rebus Airbnb.
Brilliant.
And you would walk in, there'd be a cigarette in the ashtray smouldering. There'd be a record playing on the record player. There'd be dishes in the sink. You'd open up the fridge with nothing there but milk and beer, maybe some dog food sitting somewhere.
And
you get the
Brillo
whole Rebus experience.
That's brilliant. How many people would completely go for that?
Yeah, 1 or 2, man, but not enough for it to make it worth my while.
Bed and breakfast and Brillo. You could have that entirely be the way you sell it. Before I let you go, I have to mention, of course, that making a return appearance in the book, Laura Smith, originally in your books because of All in a Day on CBC Radio. She was a listener of ours. She still lives here in Ottawa, who bid on the charity we were raising money for and won the chance to be in one Rebus novel way back then as a reporter, and she has continued. Man, she is, and she has quite pivotal roles in here.
She got a lot of bang for her buck.
She really did.
She got a lot of bang for her buck. She's not the only one. I mean, Christine Essen, who's a detective who works alongside Siobhan Clarke, is a real person, a businesswoman in Edinburgh who paid years ago to be in the books. And because she's a detective, I need detectives in my books. So she stuck around. I need a journalist, sometimes a crime journalist. So Laura's stuck. I mean, yeah. I mean, if I need them, I'm trying to think actually in this book, some real people who are in it who paid. Lee Child,
okay,
and Karen Slaughter, two thriller writer, crime novelists.
Yeah.
2 years ago at a charity auction in the States, in Florida, they bid against each other and bid the same amount of money. And so I was asked, "Look, would you put them both in your next book?" So. And I thought, well, you can't have Detective Inspector Lee Child and Detective Chief Inspector Karen Slaughter. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So they have to appear in this book as themselves, which they do. I've got them appearing at a sold-out event in the biggest venue in Edinburgh,
yes.
And Siobhan and one of our in fact, Christine Essen, Siobhan and Christine are going along to see them perform. So yeah, it's it's a fun thing to do for charity. It is a fun thing to do. And some of the characters have taken on a life of their own, including Laura Smith.
Laura Smith, she's not going anywhere. Last question for you. There's a toast at one point that is done in this book where between Cameron and Collins, and where it says, "Here's to us, was like us. And I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about this toast.
Oh man, not much without looking it up. I mean, here's to us was like us, Guy few and the raw deed. Who's similar to us? Who's like us? Not many, and they're all dead. So we're sort of, yeah. I mean, it's a very Scottish toast, isn't it? It's kind of bleak. It's bleak at the same time. It's kind of, yeah. It's often in a pub. You know, you'll say, "Here's to us was like us. Here's to us who's like us." Very few, and they're all dead. And then you sort of, if you're not using the Gaelic term slange, which is kind of cheers, I just like it. I mean, I don't know. It's dark.
Yeah.
It's very Scottish, isn't it? Now, I was discussing this recently with somebody about how crime fiction in particular suits the Scots mentality or the Scots philosophy of life, because we are creatures of light and darkness. We get long summer nights and very long winter days, and there's that division within us, that Jekyll and Hyde thing that I've been talking about on and off during this conversation, and that suits us to writing crime fiction. But yeah, I mean, when Scots get together and start singing songs, it's not long before they start crying. You know, usually nostalgically thinking back to the way things used to be in the old days and how everything's changed. And I guess that is looking back. That toast is looking back at the way things were, the way life changes, and it's coming to us all. I mean, mortality is the one thing coming to us all. And one of the pleasures of writing these later Rebus novels has been his knowledge of that.
Yeah.
His knowledge that he's no longer a cop. Does he still serve a use? Does he still have a useful thing that he can be doing? Is he still a useful member of society? Are his skills still valuable? What's going to happen to him now he's got COPD? He's not going to get better from it. So that he's gone into a kind of long and managed decline. And so he's very aware of that, and he's very conscious that there's unfinished business. His daughter was and remains unfinished business. Cafferty was and remains unfinished business. And that gives me challenges for future books. I don't quite know where to take him next or where he's going to want to go next. But I don't think I'm quite done with him yet. And hopefully he's not done with me.
And hopefully we will be able to raise a toast before too long, face to face again, Ian Rankin. This has been fantastic. Not quite the same as having you in the room with us. So we're looking forward to the day when we'll be back again, face to face. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. This has been fantastic. It's another great read, and it's been great talking to you again.
Thanks. Always good to catch up with you, Alan.